Greetings, Nick with Sweetwater here, and today's video stems from a question I got hit with a bunch of times after my recent Craft 4 classic rock guitar tones without breaking the bank video, which thankfully earned a bunch of positive comments. Thanks for that. Phew! The question I kept getting asked is this one. What exactly do you do when trying to emulate a famous guitar sound? How do you approach it? That's a really good question, and hopefully one I'll be able to shed some light on over the next few minutes. Simply put, whenever I go on a tone-chasing expedition, I use my eyes and my ears. Imagine that. I use my ears to listen, really carefully, and I use my eyes to do some deep dive research. And hopefully, I utilize my brain too. Researching what my guitar heroes do and why they do it has always fascinated me. I want to know who influenced them, how and what they practice, how do they write, their approach to soloing, what gear they use live and in the studio, yada. I just love finding that stuff out. In fact, I lived for it back then, and I still do right now if truth be told. Consequently, when it comes to tone chasing a particular riff or song, I do as much research as I possibly can. I'll try and find out not only what gear the artist was using at the time the song was recording, but also, if possible, what he or she actually used when recording the song in question. Imagine that. Of course, the latter is not always possible, but if you dig deep enough and for long enough, it's amazing what you can unearth. Especially in the modern world we currently live in thanks to the internet and all the search engine capability out there. To this end, I'll not only focus my search on the guitarist, him or herself, but also on their guitar tech at the time, plus the engineer and producer of the album I'm looking at. I have to say, I've learned a lot of great stuff from guitar techs, recording engineers, and producers over the years. An awful lot, just by digging around the internet. Also, sometimes a simple photo of the artist in the studio can literally speak volumes. So, head over to Google land and have at it. I don't mind admitting I'm more than a little leery and skeptical of forum posts and internet videos made by self-proclaimed experts. I steer well clear of those guys. Instead, I look for information from more reliable sources with a proven track record and the respect of their peers, like Pete Thorne, Rick Beato, James Santiago, Tim Pierce, Ola England, or Dave Friedman, for example. Obviously, articles and interviews done by reputable and respected publications such as Guitar World, Guitar Player, Premier Guitar, or Vintage Guitar magazines are always good places to hunt for information too. The stuff I'm invariably trying to find out is not only the guitar, amp, and cab being used, but also, whenever possible, pickups, pedals, string gauges, tuning, playing action, and even the pick used. Also, knowing the signal path and exactly what order the pedals are in is really important to me too, as all of that stuff definitely impacts tone. For example, a guitar loaded with high output humbuckers going into a Crank Marshall JCM 800 with an overdrive pedal in front of it is obviously going to sound way different than, say, a Telecaster plugged into the exact same amp with no pedal involved. I'll also try and find live videos of the artist playing the song in question. And when I find them, I'm not only paying attention to the guitar and amps being used, but also where the pickup selector is and where exactly on the neck they're playing the riff or part I'm hell-bent on aping, because that can and will have an impact on the tone of the riff being played. If you don't believe me, play the classic opening Paranoid riff in both the 7th and 12th positions and compare the two. As you'll hear, the 7th position version, played on the A, D, and G strings, is brighter sounding than the one at the 12th position, played on the low E, A, and D strings. I'm going to do a quick guitar change to an ESP Eclipse in regular tuning, and we'll quickly check out the difference I've just talked about. Here's the riff played in the 7th position. And here's the exact same riff with the exact same notes played in the 12th position. As you've hopefully just heard, even with my dodgy playing, the 12th position one is definitely darker and more ominous sounding, and that's why Mr. Iommi plays it in that position. I rest my case. playing position of a riff matters. Now, when I first started playing, it was effectively the Stone Age. There was no internet. Hard rock was almost never shown on English TV, aside from, of course, the glorious Old Grey Whistle Test show, and there was hardly any concert footage on film either, aside from the first Woodstock, Live Aid, and of course Led Zeppelin's excellent The Song Remains the Same, which I went to see no fewer than 3 times at my local film theatre. Thus, the only real source for the information I so desperately wanted to know was print. So, I'd voraciously read every single interview I could possibly find with my guitar heroes. Plus, of course, I'd go to every single concert I could afford. Me and my friends would always be there before the doors opened so we could literally run in and get as close to the front of the stage as possible. On the guitarist side, of course, in my case, that way I could really focus on their hands, and that's still what I do to this very day. I'd also pick the brains of the local guitar players I respected, face to face. Remember, there was no Facebook or Instagram back then. Hell, there weren't even cell phones, let alone texting. You actually had to talk to people. What a concept! Never catch on. This all said, as I know you know, at the very end of the day, guitar tone ultimately comes from the head, heart, and hands of the player. And that's what I really love about the guitar. You can give the same exact guitar plugged into the same exact amp to 3 different guitar players and then ask them all to play the exact same riff or lick without changing any settings on the guitar or the amp, and guess what? They'd all sound completely different. They'd all sound like themselves. Now, if you're a cynical SOB like I am, at this point you're probably thinking, that's great, Nick. I've done my research and now I know my hero used a vintage Gibson Les Paul worth more than my car, plugged into a Marshall stack cranked to 11 while using an old tape unit that's no longer made anymore to drive the amp. I don't have any of that stuff. So now what? First and foremost, my friend, guess what? I don't have any of that stuff either. Welcome to the club. It's a really, really big one. That truth stated, the answer is simple. Use whatever you can get your hands on and improvise, MacGyver it if you will. You'll be surprised at what you can achieve with a little bit of work and experimentation, so don't give up. Go for it. As the saying goes, knowledge is power, providing of course you act on it as best you can. So the more you know, the better armed you'll be in your tone quest. And there's never been a better time than now regarding gear. I mean, there are so many great sounding and affordable amps in a box pedals out there, for example, like the Wampler Plexi Drive, the JHS Angry Charlie, the Boss IR2, the TC Electronics Dual Rec, the Diesel VH42, the Sedano SLO pedal, and the Victory Copper, to name but 7. And the same applies to overdrive, distortion, fuzz, and EQ pedals. There's literally hundreds of them out there. Go to sweetwater.com if you don't believe me. So, take a deep breath, use your ears, your brain, experiment with whatever you can get your hands on, and have at it. As already mentioned, at least 5 times, in addition to doing as much research as you possibly can, the other thing you need to do is use your ears. And wait for it, listen to the riff or song in question really closely. The things I try and zone in on are as follows. Number 1, if it's an overdriven, distorted or fuzzy tone, and in my case it invariably is, how much gain is actually being used? I mean, there's a big difference between a crunchy Malcolm Young overdrive sound and a full tilt Jimi Hendrix style fuzz, for example. Now, a mistake I find a lot of people invariably make, myself included, is using way too much distortion or overdrive for the song in question, especially, for example, on AC/DC stuff or early Van Halen. I mean, if you listen to the guitars on, say, Van Halen 1 or Highway to Hell really carefully, they're not half as dirty as you may first think. To my ears, a good indicator of the amount of gain actually being used is the amount of individual note and string definition you can hear when the guitar player hits a chord. Point number 2, another thing to really zone in on is the overall EQ of the guitar sound. A good way of doing this, in my humble opinion, is to divide and conquer by trying to really focus on the lows, mids, and highs separately. And then ask yourself questions like this. How cutting is the guitar tone? Are the highs sharp and clear, or are they a little fizzy and hashy sounding? And what's going on in the mid-range? Are they scooped, flat, or boosted? Now, due to the fact the bass guitar is invariably almost always there, the lows are often harder to determine. To that end, if you can find a section of the song where there's no bass, just guitar, that's a definite bonus. Like, for example, the intros to Led Zeppelin's Heartbreaker, AC/DC's Highway to Hell, Van Halen's Unchained, or Black Sabbath's Into the Void. Another thing you can do is this. See if you can find the isolated guitar track on the YouTubes. There's an ever-increasing number out there. Just please make sure it's from the actual recording and not some YouTube Yahoo playing it through a click track. To help me dial in stuff, what I invariably do is this. I start with the gain and tone controls on my amp or pedal set at 12 o'clock and work from there, dialing in more or less of each according to what I hear. And once again, if you're not sure, experiment and use these. Like anything really worth doing, this is hard and maybe even intimidating at the very beginning, but it does get easier the more you do it. Trust me, I'm a doctor. One other thing you might want to be aware of and take into consideration is the fact that many rhythm guitar tracks are often doubled or even tripled, often with different guitars and amps on each track to get a nice fat blend. The best of both worlds, or even three worlds if you will. And the same is also true of certain solos, Randy Rhoads being a great example of that. That's why, whenever possible, if the band has a live album or DVD with the song in question on it, that's what I'll invariably use as my main tonal reference. Make sense? No doubling. Hopefully a few of these thoughts have helped you, but like I've said, at the end of the day, your most valuable tool for this job will be your ears, so please, please use them. I don't mind admitting I was pretty horrible at doing this at first, but the more I did it, like I said, the better I got. And once you get pretty good at getting the tone close enough for rock and roll, providing you can play the riff or song pretty well, and with conviction, of course, the work and the results are well worth it. Good tone plus good playing, that's definitely a winning combination. And remember, there's no Apple Store phone app for this though. You've got to put in the time and effort yourself. It's up to you, my friend. It's up to you. Do the work. Anyway, enough of my yammering. Let me show you a quick example of me putting some of my alleged methodology into action. And we're going to do this by trying to emulate the tone of one of my favorite metal riffs of all time, namely Symptom of the Universe by Black Sabbath. This opus of truly magnificent heaviness appeared on Sabbath's sixth studio album, 1975, Sabotage, this one right here. Now, as soon as I heard its ominous opening tritone riff, I was hooked, and my quest back in the day was to get as close to Tony Iommi's brutal tone as I possibly could. I did my research, the pre-internet old-school way I just told you about, and after a while I found out the following. In addition to using his Gibson SG loaded with P90 pickups, Iommi used the Laney Supergroup 100-watt tube head with EL34 power tubes. Furthermore, I found out that he apparently used a modified Dallas Rangemaster treble booster, which apparently boosted the upper mids as well as the lower treble frequencies, also adding a slightly compressed grit that front-ended his Laney gloriously. He also used really light gauge strings, and the resulting looseness definitely impacted his sound, especially when he tuned down. Now, back then, I certainly didn't have an SG or P90 pickups, and I also didn't have a Laney tube stack and a Rangemaster. All I had was a cheap Les Paul copy loaded with whatever humbuckers it came with, a solid-state combo that surprisingly back in those days had a pretty decent overdrive sound, and a pile of second-hand pedals I messed with. After listening very carefully to the recorded version of Symptom of the Universe, my pretty untrained ear heard a slightly fuzzy edge to Tony's chugging. So I did the following. I pulled out my trusty Electro-Harmonix Big Muff pipe pedal and plugged it into my amp's clean channel to get that element into my sound. Then, to give my tone more cut and punch, while still remaining suitably dark, warm and gloomy, I put a graphic EQ pedal in front of my Big Muff pedal to goose up the upper mids and higher lows and also boost the overall signal. After much trial and even more error, I ended up with a tone that earned lots of positive comments whenever my band, a then fledgling Grim Reaper, performed Symptom of the Universe live. To try and revisit my first ever tone-chasing attempt in the late 70s and 80s, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to use this fine ESP LTD Eclipse guitar with a set of 8-gauge strings on it because that's what Mr. Iommi would use when he was tuned to regular tuning. Then my signal goes through an MXR 10-band graphic EQ and a Big Muff pedal before hitting the clean channel of my 50-watt Blackstar debut 1x12 combo. Here's the sound of the clean channel of the amp without any pedals switched on. None more clean. Now here it is with the Big Muff kicked in. That was fuzzy but kind of gnarly and indistinct, so here's the exact same Big Muff setting, but this time with my 10-band graphic EQ kicked in, like I said, goosing the upper mids, the lower highs, and also the gain into the pedal. Let's check it out. That's more like it. Now let's hear the riff in question using those two pedals in tandem. Yeah, looking back, that wasn't too bad really, especially considering that was my very first attempt at tone chasing and also taking into account the gear I didn't have to play with. I had very little and I made the best of what I had. That said, back then I always felt it was missing a little bit of Tony Iommi's trademark darkness, and listening to it now, I definitely still do. That little bit of tonal time travel over, we now fast forward to much more recent times and me getting my paws on two additions to my tonal arsenal. Firstly, the Catlin-bred Sabracadabra pedal, and also a Tony Iommi signature Epiphone Monkey SG loaded with Seymour Duncan P90 silencer pickups, and the bridge one is a Jared J. Nichols signature model. Nice. In a nutshell, the Sabracadabra is an amp-in-a-box pedal that emulates the sound of a Rangemaster driving a supergroup Laney head. And to my ears, it does it well. Really, really well. Incidentally, links to videos on both this guitar and the pedal can be found in the description below. Anyway, here's what this pairing sounds like when plugged into the clean channel of the debut combo. Not shabby at all. Now, as you may have noticed, I just played this E minor riff in a different position on this guitar. Why? Because I'm now tuned down to C sharp, so my E5 chord is now in the third position, right here. Now, for many years, I automatically assumed this E minor riff was played on a regularly tuned guitar for obvious reasons, duh, E in E. But then, thanks to getting to see Tony play this song live from close range and paying very close attention to his hands, the proverbial penny dropped. And by dropping all the strings down 1.5 steps and keeping the gauges light, just like Tony does, all of a sudden the aforementioned missing darkness was no longer an issue. Mystery solved. Ironically, I had the good fortune of interviewing Tony on no fewer than 12 occasions before discovering he was tuned down to C sharp for this song. And I never once thought to ask him about the tuning on my all-time favorite Sabbath riff. Unbelievable. What an idiot I am. Shame on me. To my ears, the combination of my Epiphone Iommi SG and the Sabracadabra pedal definitely puts a big tick in my Symptom of the Universe tone search box. That said, if you'd like to go 100% pedal to the metal on your Tony Iommi tone quest, I'm going to finish by quickly touching on that option. First up, you get a Gibson version of the Iommi Monkey. Now, this SG is straight from the Sweetwater store, hence the reason the monkey sticker isn't on it. It's not mine. Damn it. Oh well. Secondly, you get a Laney LA30BL Supergroup tube head and LA 2x12 cabinet. This classy looking combination offers that legendary all-tube supergroup sound in a convenient 30-watt half-stack format. And last, but certainly not least, you get yourself a Laney Black Country Customs TI Boost Tony Iommi signature pedal. This bad boy right here. Bearing Tony's signature, this pedal not only emulates the sound of his famous modified Rangemaster, but also offers a bunch of other cool tonal options as well. And what does this great looking setup sound like, do I hear you ask? Well, I'm going to play out with it in a second, so stay tuned, my friend, stay tuned. Hopefully, this quick overview on how I approach trying to emulate a famous tone as best I can has proven helpful. Please take whatever you find useful and discard whatever you don't. Thanks for watching, and remember, and I know I've said this before, I'm going to say it again now, the more you do this, the better you will become. So stick with it and don't let a few not even close instances put you off. You've got this, just use these, these, and these. That stated, as promised, I'm now going to play out with the setup we've just looked at by playing the opening to the first song on Sabotage, a charming little ditty called Hole in the Sky. A song, by the way, I was fortunate enough to play at a dime bash a few years back with Vinny Appice on drums, and believe it or not, none other than Geezer Butler on bass. Can you say massive bucket list tick? That unashamed name-dropping session over. I'm out of here. See ya! Yeah, thanks so very much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, nicely please, and also subscribe. Please click here for more videos like this and go to sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs. Cheerio!